Under the harsh glare of reality TV, few narratives gripped the global imagination like that of Kody Brown and his out-of-the-box family. As soon as the audience got to see him, they knew he wasn't a common man leading a common life. There was a secret lurking behind every smile he flashed in front of the cameras, and behind every secret was a storm that was just waiting to break. Kody Brown wasn't merely a husband, he was a husband to 4 wives and a father to over 18 children. His existence was filled with contradictions: love and jealousy, loyalty and betrayal, faith and control. What began as a pioneering reality show on family togetherness would soon become one of television history's most sensational deconstructions. This is the tale of how a man who had a vision for creating a kingdom of love became the ruler of a broken empire. When Sister Wives premiered in 2010, there were millions of viewers hooked from the very beginning. People weren't accustomed to polygamy being exposed so freely on primetime TV. Kody Brown stood tall proudly, introducing us to his family with an enormous smile and a surge of enthusiasm. His curly blonde hair and friendly personality made him appear accessible, even likable. He described a family held together by faith, loyalty, and love. Around him were 4 women who had given their lives to him: Meri, the legally married first wife; Janelle, the down-to-earth one who balanced independence and responsibility; Christine, the nurturing caretaker who bore the bulk of children; and last but not least, Robyn, the youngest and newest wife, who joined the family later but soon became the hub of Kody's life. The Browns welcomed America into their home, revealing to many what they saw as a secretive and misunderstood way of living. Initially, their message appeared strong. Kody insisted that polygamy was not lust or control, but love and faith. The wives, despite each of them struggling differently, accepted being open and telling their story to the world. Fans sat on their sofas as the Browns struggled, sharing time, having children, and maintaining peace in a home where more than one woman had to share one man's attention. The Browns seemed poised for an instant to defy the critics and demonstrate that polygamy was a harmonious system. But when the cameras kept rolling year after year, fissures started to develop in the idyllic picture Kody had constructed. Meri, his first wife, bore the greatest burden. Once Kody's sole companion, she now felt eclipsed. Despite her smile for the cameras, she was consumed by loneliness. Janelle, practical and forceful, pushed people away, channeling her energy into work and creating her own sense of independence beyond family dynamics. Christine, bubbly and eager, craved more affection than Kody ever appeared to give. And then there was Robyn, lovely, younger, and desperate to win approval, who soon became the object of Kody's devotion. Fans were observant, wives were aware, and before long the favoritism started eating away at the family from the inside. Things hit rock bottom when Meri, feeling lonely and neglected, got caught up in a scandal that rocked the family and left fans nationwide gobsmacked. Feeling overlooked and discarded, she went on the hunt for companionship on the internet. What she thought was a man giving her the attention she desired proved to be a heartless catfishing operation. The shame was overwhelming, not only for Meri, but for the whole family as the world witnessed her anguish on TV. Instead of standing by her side, Kody was aloof, icy, and merciless. This moment showed a grimmer side of him, less charismatic leader, and more controlling husband who punished instead of comforted. Christine's turning point was even more spectacular. After years of living in a marriage where she felt unwanted, she made the unconventional decision to leave him. For years she had complained loudly about being unhappy, admitting that Kody ignored her needs and dismissed her feelings. But when she finally mustered the strength to exit, the world blew up debating. Christine's resignation was not merely a matter of personal preference. It was a public statement that even in a polygamous household, one has the right to stand on one's own free from subjugation. The move struck a chord with viewers who had long condemned Kody's preferential treatment of Robyn. Overnight, the ideal facade of the Brown family disintegrated before the camera's gaze. With the wives struggling, the children stepped forward too. Most of them shared the hurt of having been raised in a home where their father's attention was invariably split, and very often unfairly. Some confessed that they hardly ever saw Kody at all, while others shared that they felt ignored in comparison to Robyn's children. The inequality of parenting, along with Kody's increasing fixation on keeping control, left deep wounds. These admissions changed people's perception of him. What was curiosity regarding polygamy gave way to anger at seeing a father apparently fail in his role within the lives of so many of his children. The subsequent seasons of Sister Wives covered the empire's downfall in slow motion. Janelle finally split, unable to carry on in a marriage that brought her little satisfaction. Meri, once emotionally detached for years, finally released and walked away. Christine was already gone, starting a new life with her children. And in the end, Kody was left with just Robyn, the woman most fans had thought was his favorite from the very beginning. Proud once of his big family, Kody was now ruling over a shattered home, with estranged kids and failed marriages in his wake. The family that had initially come across as solidified by faith had transmogrified into a parable against favoritism, pride, and the perils of ignoring. The takeaways from Kody Brown's tale extend beyond polygamy. They resonate with fundamental truths about relationships, respect, and equality. A marriage, be it monogamous or polygamous, will not survive without love and attention between the two partners. When one feels ignored, dismissed, or unloved, fissures will form. In Kody's situation, those cracks expanded into irreconcilable chasms, leaving in their wake heartbreak and bitterness. What began as a courageous effort to demonstrate that love could be equally shared, became a tragic model of the power imbalance and favoritism has to dismantle even the healthiest of connections. For fans who had been watching the Browns since the early days, the collapse of their saga was like the close of an era. Millions had watched to see a way of life that paralleled rarely on television. They had wanted to see something different, maybe even to see a family that was different yet successful. What they saw was the dream of togetherness become a nightmare of separation. Today, the Browns are a broken family, their promising tale marred by betrayal, scandal, and loss forever. And at the center of it all stands Kody Brown, the man who used to envision himself as a husband of many, but became a husband of one, while the rest of his family is broken and dispersed. His tale is entertainment and cautionary tale, a reminder that beneath each smile is a secret, and beneath each secret lies a storm to be unleashed. In 2010, reality TV made a bold move into new territory when TLC welcomed audiences to meet the Browns, a clan unlike anything most of America had ever encountered on mainstream television. The cameras scanned over smiling faces, the activity of a lively household, and a man at its center, Kody Brown, with his curly blonde hair, effervescent personality, and booming voice. Kody moved about as if he felt he had a purpose to impart. He was not only a husband, but a husband to 4 wives, and not only a father, but the father of over 18 children. It wasn't only the enormity of the family that made the Browns stand out, but the fact that they publicly lived the way of life which had long been covered up. Polygamy, on first impression, audiences had no idea what to believe. Polygamy was something that most people had only ever heard of in textbooks or connected with hushed scandals. And here it was, in Technicolor, presented to the world at large. For the Browns, this was not merely a domestic arrangement. It was a lifestyle based on their faith and beliefs. By going on public record, they weren't just inviting spectators into their front rooms, but challenging the world to question its assumptions. Was polygamy truly about faith and love? Was it a viable system of family values, or was it destined to founder beneath the forces of jealousy, competition, and human nature? The wives, Meri, Janelle, Christine, and Robyn, each presented themselves with open faces and tentative vulnerability. Meri, the original wife, had been with Kody since the start. She bore the responsibility of being the pillar of the family, the one who'd watched everything grow from 2 individuals to a large household. Janelle, practical and considerate, was a strong, independent woman in her own right. Christine, bubbly and mothering, was usually the one who kept the children's universe whirring round properly, giving herself to motherhood with all her might. And then there was Robyn, the latest recruit, younger than the rest, serene and willing to slot into the family that had been formed long before her birth. It was something like a social experiment being staged before their very eyes. Every episode of Sister Wives provided them with an opportunity to look into a home that disrupted the conventions of what marriage and family were expected to be. The Browns positioned themselves as trailblazers, individuals who wanted to redefine love and prove that it was possible to share one husband with justice and respect. Kody himself used to say that his purpose was to demonstrate that polygamy was not about lust or male domination. To him, it was about having a big, loving family held together by faith. He claimed his wives were friends, not possessions, and that the family was founded on spiritual concepts of unity, loyalty, and respect. But no matter how much Kody preached about love and devotion, the questions on everyone's mind weren't so easily dissuaded. Could one man really split 4 marriages? Could he share his time, his heart, and his energy between so many individuals without one of them feeling left behind? Even in traditional monogamous marriage, couples fought with poor communication, unfulfilled expectations, and the rigors of everyday life. How was it possible that one man could quadruple that effort and anticipate harmony? These were not questions raised only by polygamy critics, but by interested viewers who were hoping to believe, hoping to see if the Browns could indeed make it work. The family initially tried to project their togetherness. There were family dinners, family outings, and sincere discussions about how they managed to overcome their difficulties. The wives would admit that the jealousy was real, but then add that they struggled with it by holding on to their faith and living the bigger picture. For most of them, the bigger picture was the raising of children in a loving, stable, supportive home, albeit one where that support might come from several mothers rather than one. Children were the common thread. The Browns sought to demonstrate that, despite being untraditional, their family could still raise well-adjusted children. The polygamy dream, as Kody introduced it, wasn't about quantity. It was about creating a dynasty of sorts. The wives were confidants, sisters, and co-parents. They weren't meant to vie for Kody's affection, but rather share it so that they were fortified as a unit. It was a vision of harmony that few outsiders could envision, but the Browns wished to demonstrate that it was possible. The concept was nearly utopian. Several women maintaining a support system around each other as they raised children in joint households, with Kody serving as the unifying force that brought them all together. Over the course of the seasons, viewers came to observe both the potential and tension of this setup. The wives all spoke openly about their challenges, how hard it had been to share their husband, how difficult it had been not to compare themselves to the others, and how tiring it could be to balance in this big family. But they also had moments of happiness, birthdays spent with laughter, vacations filled with energy, and quiet times where their friendship felt indomitable. For a while, it seemed like perhaps, just perhaps, Kody's dream could work. The family's willingness presented viewers with a bizarre paradox. One moment, they were impressed with the Browns for being honest and courageous in putting their lifestyle up for judgment and scrutiny. The next moment, they couldn't help noticing the cracks beginning to emerge, the indications here and there that everything was not as perfect as Kody indicated. As he preached fairness and equality, he would get uneven workloads from his audience. His declarations of balance did not always correlate with what viewers would see on television. Yet when he started out, the majority of them gave him the benefit of doubt. There was no family that didn't have its issues, and this one was a lot more complicated than others. What amazed audiences the most was the human aspect. Under the religious justifications and cultural variances, the Browns were just like regular people struggling to make relationships function. They laughed, they fought, they struggled with money, parenting, and jealousy. Viewers saw themselves in tiny bits of the narrative, even though they couldn't picture sharing a spouse. That human connection is what made Sister Wives such a dominant force. It wasn't so much about polygamy. It was about sacrifice, love, and the complicated family dynamics. For Kody, his polygamy dream existed beyond his own household. It existed to send a message to the world. He wanted to demonstrate to the world that his family would be able to work, prosper, and even be an inspiration. He wanted to put stereotypes to an end and demonstrate that polygamy wasn't necessarily abusive or oppressive. In those early years, he tended to talk as a man on a mission, as if the television show itself was a vehicle to enlighten the masses. His energy was infectious, his fervor unyielding. He smiled, laughed, and persuaded viewers that he actually believed in the system he adhered to. But even in those early years, seeds of strife were already sown. Every wife was different, with her own tale, her own battles, and her own requirements. No amount of shouting about equality by Kody could eliminate human feelings. The audience started questioning whether the utopia of polygamy, as lovely as it seemed when painted by Kody, was just too delicate to withstand real life's demands and the constant scrutiny of the camera. The Browns had entered the spotlight in a bid to alter the world's attitude. They succeeded. For a time, they generated discussion at dinner parties, in churches, and on social media. People argued over whether polygamy was viable, whether it was ethical, whether it was equitable to women. But underlying the arguments and the intrigue, one fact remained: the dream was potent, but reality tends to test even the best ideals. And so, while the family smiled for the cameras and parroted their message of love and faith, the world looked on with equal amounts of curiosity and suspicion. The Browns had presented us with a dream to hold on to, but time would tell if that dream could remain, or if it would ultimately fail under the weight it was bearing. But the dream didn't linger long. What appeared to be harmony in appearance was, in reality, a delicate balance that could be easily upset. Behind the smiling faces and orchestrated family dinners, fissures were beginning to emerge in the fabric of the Brown home. While cameras were rolling, the wives attempted to maintain the illusion of togetherness, but jealousy, isolation, and unfulfilled needs started creeping through the cracks. Meri, the original wife, had once been the center of Kody's universe. She had been with him from the start, before the cameras, before the fame, and before the big family to take care of. She bore the weight of being the original wife, the one who had helped him begin this journey. But as the family expanded and more wives were added, her footing started to become less sure. She wanted viewers to visualize it in her eyes, the isolation she always attempted to disguise through forced smiles. She yearned for the affection she once had, the closeness that has diminished over the years. She still looked strong to the rest of the world, but secretly she struggled with feelings of loneliness. Her once private love story was now a public theater of operations, where she constantly felt like the overlooked player. Janelle was different, practical, disciplined, and fiercely independent. She coped with her loneliness differently, by immersing herself in work. Rather than waiting for Kody's attention, she constructed an identity independent of him. She was the career-oriented wife, the one who oversaw duties others would rather not assume. This brought her power but also alienation. Janelle wasn't seeking to compete with Robyn and Christine for Kody's love. She'd already resigned herself to the possibility that she would never receive enough of it. But this resignation came at a price. Emotional distance increased, and marriage to Kody started to resemble more of a convenience partnership than one founded on passion or intimacy. Christine, conversely, was much more transparent with her needs. She desired affection, attention, and a husband who made her feel special. But too frequently, those needs weren't being met. Her effervescent personality and sunny smile usually concealed a heart that was being silently shattered. She vented her frustration more openly than the others, sometimes on camera, sometimes in confrontational scenes with Kody. She wished to believe in the polygamy dream, but the reality was being much tougher. To Christine, each moment of abandonment was a bitter reminder that she was fighting for something that need never have been a fight: her husband's love. And then Robyn arrived. The youngest wife, the newest member, and the one most fans would later refer to as Kody's favorite. From the beginning, something changed. Kody's approach to her was different. He smiled more, he laughed more, and he would light up whenever she was around. To the public, it was clear. To the wives, it was unmistakable. As much as they attempted to keep up the facade of equality, they could not deny what their hearts already told them. Kody was spending more time with Robyn, more attention on Robyn, more love on Robyn. This favoritism did not escape the radar of fans. As the episodes were broadcast, viewers inundated social media with their remarks. They called out how Kody was more affectionate with Robyn, how he stood up for her more frequently, and how he spent longer periods of time in her home versus the others. The wives, who had appeared solidary in their collective challenges early on, now found themselves gravitating towards silent factions. Some held grudges against Robyn, some against Kody, and some against both. The anxiety in the air could not be concealed, despite the best efforts of the family to smile it off. The fissures grew larger as Kody's actions grew more transparent. His reasons for not spending time with the other wives tended to ring hollow. He would say he was busy, but the cameras told a different story. He wasn't busy enough to spend time with Robyn. The wives sensed it, the children did too, and the audience witnessed it week after week. It became apparent that equality, one of the founding guarantees of their polygamous existence, no longer existed. What remained was an imbalance that would only become increasingly hazardous to their dynamics over time. Meri felt lonelier. She attempted to maintain her position within the family, but the emotional distance from Kody was too much. Communication between them became strained, cold more often than not, and the intimacy that had characterized their relationship seemed to disappear. She smiled on camera, but off camera, she was wrestling with feelings of rejection. Being the first wife, a position she had once held so dearly, now felt like a shadow of what it used to be. Christine was disappointed. She had been so open about her struggles, acknowledging that she felt she wasn't being seen or respected. She was being honest, and her honesty was relatable to viewers who could sense her hurt. She wanted a husband to look at her the way he looked at Robyn, but that day never arrived. The more that she complained about being unhappy, the more Kody pushed her away from him, rather than actually taking her concerns seriously. Janelle, outwardly serene, was increasingly a stranger in Kody's world. She did not fight like Christine, or cry as frequently as Meri, but her lack of resistance was deafening. She constructed an independent self, establishing a life that wasn't defined by Kody. In the process, however, she created an even greater distance between the two of them. It was no longer so much about love as about preserving a system that was in shambles. In the meantime, Robyn's place only strengthened. She was Kody's center of everything. His wife he relied on most, the one he appeared to truly adore. To Robyn's credit, she frequently attempted to stand up for herself, insisting that she never wanted to be the favorite, but words could not erase the fact. The imbalance was evident, and it bred resentment that could not be refused. The once together Brown family, who had promised to show the audience a view of love, faith, and cooperation, started to crumble into shreds. Each of the wives was struggling with her own demons, her own wars, and her own disillusionments. Kody, far from closing the gap that widened between them, actually seemed to pull further into his relationship with Robyn. The more he showed favor towards her, the deeper the hurt became for the others. What was originally presented as a polygamy dream now seemed more like an inequality nightmare. Viewers who had originally been intrigued by the Browns began to express their outrage. The show's comment feeds and social media streams overflowed with viewers crying out about the unfairness, the favoritism, and the neglect. What began as interest in a strange lifestyle became a public cry against the imbalance they witnessed. The foundation cracks were no longer secret. They stood before everyone, exposed for all to see. The family that had held up as a beacon of hope and belief now appeared to be disintegrating, because of jealousy and preferential treatment. The wives were no longer together, the kids were no longer protected from the war, and the fans were no longer assured that this fantasy could endure. And while the Browns kept their faces strong for the cameras, inside they all knew the truth. The foundation was crumbling, the faith was weakening, and the love that was supposed to win them all together was quietly slipping away. The polygamy dream had promised equality, yet what the Browns were experiencing was something far different. The cracks in the foundation had grown too large to ignore, and soon, those cracks would widen into a collapse that no amount of faith could repair. The Browns' tale had already been changing from one of fascination and respect to one of distrust and unease. But nothing could have prepared fans for the deluge of scandals and betrayals that would come to characterize the family's most tumultuous years. For viewers who had previously thought they were viewing a tale of love, religiosity, and harmony, the truth that played out on television shattered that fantasy. The cracks in the family had been growing for years but burst into open scandals that would permanently alter the world's perception of Kody Brown, his wives, and the so-called polygamy dream. It started with Meri, the first wife. She had been living in the shadow of those other relationships for years. Her role as legal and spiritual wife to Kody chipped away by each new addition to the family, and the favoritism on display. Her isolation was clear to viewers. But despite all that, no one would have expected the scandal that was to explode. Yearning for love and companionship, Meri found herself involved in an online affair. To her, it appeared she had finally found someone who loved her, someone who appreciated her worth when she felt unseen in her own family. She thought she was communicating with a man who knew her suffering, who made her feel desirable and appreciated once more. But what she didn't realize was that the whole relationship was a heartless scam. The person she thought was her confidant turned out to be a catfish, someone pretending to be someone else, stringing her along in a manipulative scheme. When the truth came out, the fallout was brutal. Meri's humiliation was broadcast not just to her family, but to millions of viewers across the world. The storyline dominated headlines, and fans couldn't believe what they were seeing. Rather than sympathy from her husband, Meri was confronted with coldness and remoteness. Kody was practically indifferent, as if her suffering was an annoyance and not a hurt that had to be healed. He openly confessed that he was no longer romantically linked to her, and their marriage continued further into a loveless relationship. What pained fans the most was not the scandal itself, but the response from Kody. Rather than standing by his wife at her lowest point, he appeared to pull away, making her feel more alone than ever. This was the time when most viewers started to wonder about the real nature of Kody's love. Was he the doting husband that he portrayed himself to be? Or was he a man who liked having the power polygamy provided him over several women? The more fans rewatched old episodes, the more they noticed patterns of neglect, dismissiveness, and favoritism. Meri's scandal didn't just expose her vulnerability, it exposed Kody's inability or unwillingness to treat his wives with the compassion they deserved. But Meri wasn't the only one reaching her breaking point. Christine, never one to be quiet about her misery, determined that she couldn't remain in a marriage where she was treated as second best, or worse, not even an afterthought. Christine had been the wife who smiled through the agony for years, the mother who worked herself to a frazzle, bringing the children up in hopes that her husband would finally take notice of her. But the deeper Robyn became involved, the more like a ghost Christine felt in her marriage. She craved intimacy, respect, and a husband who would view her as an equal. What she got instead were degrading remarks, broken vows, and a man who appeared to care only about one woman. After almost 3 decades of marriage, Christine did what the world of fans everywhere least expected. She was leaving Kody. Her revelation was not merely a personal decision, it was a bombshell dropped everywhere. Entertainment news was covered, generating headlines and social media storms. The picture of the Brown family, once marketed as an emblem of faith and oneness, was shattered. Sister wives were no longer united. Christine's exit was the first genuine indication that the empire was crumbling, and viewers couldn't help but turn away. She gave hope to countless viewers. Plenty had sympathized with her plight for a long time and cheered as she reclaimed her agency. She candidly revealed how Kody had diminished her, how she had pleaded for love and been discarded. Her decision to leave was not only one of individual autonomy, it was a statement that she would no longer accept living a life in which she was not loved and not respected. In interviews, Christine radiated with a level of happiness fans hadn't witnessed in years. Evidence that exiting Kody had provided her with the peace she had longed for all along. The combination of Meri's catfishing scandal and Christine's departure painted a devastating picture of Kody's household. To the outside world, the Browns were no longer a family experimenting with faith and alternative love. They were a cautionary tale. Viewers began to see the show less as a story of polygamy and more as the unraveling of one man's control over multiple women. Twitter was abuzz with observations about how cold Kody appeared, how freely he favored Robyn, and how little he tried to mend his broken marriages. Betrayal was not merely between husband and wife, but between promise and performance. The Browns promised to demonstrate to the world a loving, united polygamous family. Instead, they exposed jealousy, favoritism, and heartbreak. Fans who had previously looked up to them for their courage to open their lives up now wondered if the show itself was responsible for breaking them. Was the presence of cameras the reason Kody behaved differently, or was the show simply highlighting the realities that were always there? While Christine established her new life, and Meri grappled with the aftermath of her scandal, the rest of the wives were left to decide for themselves. Yanel, who had always been independent, also grew distant from Kody. While not as showy as Christine's departure, her departure only widened the feeling that the family was imploding. And all this time, Kody's obsession with Robyn became even more intense. The more he hung on to her, the clearer it became that she alone was the wife he actually cared for. The scandal years turned the Brown family from a television curiosity into a full-blown reality drama. What had once been marketed as a story about faith and unity became a saga of betrayal, favoritism, and broken promises. Meri's humiliation and Christine's courage were not just personal turning points. They were the public unraveling of everything Kody had claimed to stand for. The family's dream was slipping away, replaced by bitterness and resentment. For the viewers, it was heartbreaking and engrossing. They witnessed Meri fight to restore her confidence, Christine flourish in her independence, and Janelle subtly forge her own path independent of Kody's influence. They watched Robyn become the favorite wife, even as she explained she didn't want to be the cause of contention. And at the core of it all, they saw Kody, a man who was once so full of energy and conviction, now exposed as someone who had failed to hold the very commitments he had built his life upon. The betrayal and scandals were not just plot hooks for reality TV, they were the symptoms of a family in shambles. The love was lost, the trust was lost, and the vision that Kody had once shared so triumphantly with the world was crumbling brick by brick, before millions of viewers now questioning whether it ever existed in the first place. With the cracks in the Brown family opening wider and the wives more and more distant, another tide of secrets began to emerge. This time not from the women, but from the children who had grown up under the burden of Kody's decisions. For years the focus had been mainly on the relationship dynamics between Kody and his wives. The Globe picked apart each smile, each fight, and each awkward silence in that web of a marriage. But as tensions rose, the children's voices started to cut through the din. And when they spoke up, the narrative changed dramatically. What was once viewed as a great experiment in religion and polygamy started to resemble a cautionary tale of neglect, favoritism, and broken promises. The Brown children, all over 18 of them in 4 households, had grown up before television cameras. They had not volunteered for a reality show, but they matured with their family's turmoil broadcast on national television. They initially appeared as though they had adjusted, smiling over family reunions and contributing to the escapades that TLC televised for entertainment. However, deep down, there were stronger feelings that were building in silence, and soon enough, the reality started to spill out. The older children were the first ones to shatter the silence. They confessed that the image of unity in the family was a far cry from their own reality. Most confirmed that they seldom saw their father. When Kody bragged about being the head of a huge family, the children told a different story of a father who was physically and emotionally absent. They described a father who would show up when cameras were present, but who disappeared when the cameras were off. The hurt in their voices was palpable. They craved his attention, his praise, his affection, but what they got was conditional, and in most instances, absent. What hit the fans the hardest was how relentlessly the children indicated favoritism. They saw what their mothers had long intuited. Kody spent more time and energy on Robyn's children than anyone else's. Though he would proudly proclaim to loving all of his children the same, the truth was otherwise. On special days, on occasions when big decisions had to be made, or simply when a child merely wanted some attention from their father, it was Robyn's children who managed to get it. For the others, there was a pattern of waiting, of hoping, and ultimately of disappointing. Some of the children openly talked about feeling controlled, rather than nurtured. They painted Kody as a father who desired obedience but never exercised empathy. They reported he established rules and commanded respect but didn't take the time to establish personal relationships. To many of them, The relationship was more like living under an authority than being loved by a father. They were silenced when they disagreed, neglected when they had needs, and disregarded when they wished to be heard. Fans who previously admired Kody for being able to handle so many children started seeing a different image altogether. Rather than a proud dad balancing the duties of rearing so many children, they saw a man who was not able to bond with most of them. Rather than a leader keeping his family together, they had a person who had torn it apart. The children's admissions provided audiences with an unvarnished and poignant glimpse at what polygamy had been like for those who didn't have any say in it. The consequences of this abandonment reverberated throughout the children's lives. Some confessed they grappled with feelings of abandonment, despite sharing the same roof as their father. Others admitted that they felt invisible, like no matter what they did, they could never be enough to catch Kody's eye. Many of the older kids explained how these patterns influenced their perception of relationships, causing them to question what love, loyalty, and family were supposed to be. It wasn't only the kids that saw these trends. Audiences did too. On camera, it became more and more apparent which children Kody invested in, and which ones he put on the back burner. Little things told the story. His body language, the way he lit up around Robyn's kids, and the excuses he made when others came to him asking for his time. These were not one-time incidents. They were patterns that fans could no longer ignore. And as the kids themselves started coming forward in interviews and on social media to tell their truth, the facade of Kody as a dedicated father began to fall apart. The disparity between his speeches and his actions was glaring. Kody had always preached his dream of an intact family, how polygamy enabled children to be raised with greater love, not less, but in reality the opposite appeared to be true. The children spoke about living in homes where love was conditional, where time was limited, and where favoritism caused deep emotional wounds. Polygamy hadn't given them abundance. It had made them seek something that ought to have been offered without cost: their father's love. The consequences of this abandonment didn't just take a toll on the children, one by one. It stretched the chasms between the homes. Some of the children became resentful, not only against Kody, but against Robyn and her children, whom they felt were being unfairly spoiled. This resentment translated into sibling relationships, causing tension among the people who were meant to stand as brothers and sisters united. What was meant to be a supportive sibling relationship became a tattered web of hurt and competition. Fans who originally admired the Browns started to express their indignation louder. Comment boards, discussion forums, and social networks full of viewers, criticizing how humiliating it was to see the children endure. They wondered if Kody cared about all his children, or if being a father had been turned into an act for the cameras. The more the children spoke out, the harder it became for fans to believe in the dream of unity Kody had sold at the beginning of the show. One of the most heartbreaking realizations was that many of the children weren't just neglected emotionally. They were also neglected in the larger picture of their futures. They discussed how little Kody had been involved in leading them, teaching them, or preparing them for adulthood. For a man who had taken pride in being the patriarch of a huge family, the revelation by his children that the title had been symbolic rather than actual wounded him deeply. The duties of fatherhood, the care and the shepherding, were too frequently left to the mothers, who bore the emotional burden of child-raising mostly alone. The more they revealed themselves, the more the audiences realized that the family was not merely split, it was shattered. The wives had long been neglected and favored, but to hear the same hurt resonating in the voices of the children made it impossible to turn away. Kody wasn't just a failure as a husband. He was a failure as a father, and that failure was the greatest betrayal of them all. As the secrets accumulated, the public image of Kody Brown changed utterly. He no longer appeared to be a man who was boldly living his beliefs and forging an unusual family. Rather, he appeared to be a man who could not meet the demands of the role he had forged for himself. The voices of the children pierced through the din of the show's canned moments, revealing realities that could not be edited out. They were the proof of years of dereliction, favoritism, and broken vows. For the fans who had been following the Browns from the start, it was heartbreaking to see. They had envisioned that, in spite of the challenges, the kids would at least grow up knowing they were loved and cared for. But what they saw was far different. Rather than flourish in a home with so many siblings and so much supposed love, most of the children bore wounds that would last long beyond the show's lifetime. And so, while tensions between Kody and his wives continued to lead the news, the quieter yet even more agonizing tale of the children became too great to remain unspoken. Their voices unfolded the final failure of the polygamy dream. Yes, the failure of marriages, but the emotional wounds inflicted upon those who never chose this lifestyle in the first place. For them, the narrative wasn't about television ratings or culture or faith. It was about getting older and looking for the love of a father in a home where his love somehow always seemed to be for someone else. By the time filming began for the subsequent seasons of Sister Wives, the family that had been originally presented as a pioneering case of polygamy had disintegrated nearly entirely. The fissures that had started as the faint stresses and silent grievances had widened into chasms that no amount of faith or willpower could mend. What had begun as a tale of unity, love, and common devotion to one man was falling apart with the weight of betrayal, favoritism, and disillusionment. Slowly at first, the women who had initially stood by Kody started disappearing one by one, forsaking the dream they had all given so much for. First to leave was Christine, and her exodus shook the very foundations of the family. She had spent almost 3 decades of her life with him before finally reaching the breaking point. It was not an impulsive decision on her part. She had been working towards it for years. She had spoken candidly about how unhappy she had been, about how Kody had left her feeling invisible and unwanted. The favoritism towards Robyn was no longer a speculation. It was a truth that was evident before everybody's eyes. Christine's hurt had been exposed on national television, and fans related intensely with her decision. When she finally turned and walked away, it felt like she was granting permission not only to herself but to the world as well to cease pretending. Her going was heartbreaking and freeing, a moment that signalized the start of the decline of the Brown family empire. Janelle's choice next, though her journey was different from Christine's. Janelle had always been practical, a woman who prized independence and forged her own identity outside of Kody's sphere. For years she coped with the distance between them by burying herself in work and the lives of their children. But even her tolerance had its limits. The unevenness of Kody's attention, the widening gap between him and the children, the ever-present tension between the wives finally took its toll on her. Although Janelle didn't blow up with rage or announce eloquently, her subtle choice to walk away said 1,000 words. She no longer had any sense of purpose to stay in a marriage that provided her with little other than frustration and isolation. Her departure was not as dramatic as Christine's, but no less destructive to the family unit. Meri, the initial wife and the one who had been the most prominent in the marriage, had been stuck in a limbo for years. Her catfishing fiasco had embarrassed and ostracized her, and the cold reception of Kody to her sorrow had essentially broken any chance at reconciliation. The marriage was now a mere facade, a nameless relationship. For years, Meri appeared reluctant to give up, maybe holding on to the reality of what she and Kody had shared before the cameras and the rest of the wives. But as the seasons wore on, it was painfully apparent that Kody did not regard her as a real partner anymore. Finally, Meri also left, finally bringing an end to a marriage that had been on life support for years. And so, with Christine gone, Janelle leaving, and Meri walking away at last, Kody was left with only one wife standing. Robyn? She was his legal wife, the woman whom he used to insist was nothing more than another equal business partner, but whom many fans felt had always been his favorite. To the eye of observers and even to the mouth of his other wives, Robyn was the wedge that widened the gaps and hastened the collapse. To some, she was the perpetrator. To others, she was merely the recipient of Kody's partiality. Either way, the outcome was the same. The family that once boasted so proudly of being intact was now broken into smithereens, with Robyn and Kody holding together alone at the center of the rubble. The collapse of the Browns wasn't merely a matter of busted marriages. It was the collapse of an entire lifestyle. When the show originally started, Kody had boasted that his family was evidence that polygamy would work. He had wanted to demonstrate to the world that several marriages were possible under the right principles, that love could be divided evenly, and that religion could keep people together no matter what. But over the years, those promises fell apart bit by bit. What the audience received instead was jealousy, neglect, and imbalance. The polygamy dream, at least within the Brown family, had become a nightmare. The children, already tense from years of feeling neglected or set aside, now dealt with even more tension. The fact that their mothers were separated, that there was blatant favoritism toward Robyn's children, and that they were growing further away from their father left most of them angry and hurt. For some, it was about taking sides. For others, it was about receding from the family in its entirety. The cracks in the marriages had leaked into the children's lives as well, leaving marks that would only heal years later. Kody himself too, once eager and possessed of so much conviction, started to display signs of defeat. In occasional moments of candor, he acknowledged that he had failed, not as a husband, but as a father and leader. He discussed his regrets, but most of the fans felt that he was speaking too late. By the time he realized his errors, the damage had already been inflicted. The family that he had constructed, the empire that he believed would demonstrate to the world that what he felt was true, was lost. All that was left were shattered marriages, estranged relationships with his children, and a reputation that had morphed from heroic to pathetic. Viewers who had once tuned in with fascination, now watched with sadness, and sometimes even anger. They had witnessed the unraveling of a family in real time. The Browns had started as a symbol of polygamous success, but by the end, they stood as a cautionary tale. The story was no longer about faith or culture. It was about the consequences of favoritism, neglect, and ego. In later seasons, family scenes were no longer full of laughter and harmony. They were strained, uncomfortable, and even painful to watch. Discussions that used to center on collaboration now centered on conflict and blame. The wives who previously stood together now sat separately, their relationships with one another as broken as their marriages to Kody. The kids who used to be painted as happy byproducts of this unorthodox existence now openly expressed their pain and disappointment. The empire had crashed, and it had crashed hard. The Browns were no longer a poster child for the possibility of how polygamy might work. They were a poster child for the possibility of how it might go wrong in spectacular fashion. And in the midst of it all was Kody, a man who had thought he could make it all work, left now with only one wife and the weight of knowing that the family he had constructed was lost. To the fans who had witnessed the Browns since the start, the collapse was shocking but inevitable. They had witnessed the signs for years: the favoritism, the neglect, the jealousy, and were now witnessing the ultimate breakdown. What was left was not the hope of unity and love that had enthralled the spectators earlier, but the harsh truth of broken hearts and broken promises. The Browns saga was intended to be one of love, faith, and the strength of the family. Instead, it became one of betrayal, favoritism, and the perils of trying to manage too much. The collapse of the empire was not so much the demise of a TV show. It was the demise of a family that had once thought that it could show the world wrong. And while Kody was left with Robyn, the price was enormous. The cost of favoritism and neglect was the breakdown in his relationships with his remaining wives, the distance between many of his children, and the loss of the dream that he had once spoken of so ardently. In brief moments of candor, he acknowledged as much, but the invitations had come too late, and what was left of the family that had once been his pride was now his biggest failure. The Browns' empire had crumbled, and all that was left were the shards: a splintered family, fractured ties, and the nagging question of whether it had ever really worked to begin with. Kody Brown's is not the story of a man living polygamy, nor is it simply the story of a reality show family that once mesmerized television viewers with their offbeat lifestyle. It is a tale of ambition, ego, power, and the devastating price of forgetfulness regarding those who were most important. What was intended as a chance to reveal the world a glimpse into faith and family that television is never allowed to show, became a cautionary story about imbalance, favoritism, and the perils of existing in a life under the eye of the public microscope. Millions of viewers watched at first out of curiosity, mesmerized by the spectacle of one man trying to juggle 4 marriages and raise over 18 children. But they remained because what they experienced was not merely a cultural experiment. It was the deconstruction of a man and his family, in slow motion before their eyes. At the center of the drama was Kody Brown, the the self-styled patriarch who fancied himself a builder and administrator of an empire of love. In the beginning, he exuded confidence, positioning himself as a man of vision and conviction. He maintained that polygamy was not about lust or domination, but about religion, oneness, and prosperity. He addressed passionately the way in which multiple wives was not a burden but a gift, and how their kids were living evidence of a life full of love. Audience members, though cynical, were unable to help but be captivated. There was something that drew people in about Kody back then: his enthusiasm, his smile, his sense that he could defy the world's definition of family. But as the years went by, the magnetism that used to attract people, the charm and the confidence, gave way to ego and pride. Rather than constructing a castle on firm ground, Kody constructed one on unstable foundations, on promises he was not able to fulfill, on love he was not able to share equally, and on relationships that demanded more attention and care than he was ready to provide. For some time the castle walls stood firm, but soon the cracks widened too much, and the whole castle came crashing down. The teachings that came out of the Brown chaos are not monolithic to polygamy. They are applicable to all types of relationships, be they between a single husband and a single wife, or between many partners. The most obvious truth is that love can't be rationed or handed out like pieces of pie. It needs honesty, focus, and parity. When one is loved more favorably than another, others will always feel left behind. When one is loved and another is ignored, resentment will build until it can no longer be kept inside. The failure of Kody was not only in attempting to maintain 4 marriages, but in not treating each woman with the respect and love she was owed. For Meri, the first wife, the lesson was self-worth. She had invested decades grasping at a marriage that had long since collapsed, if only she were willing to admit it to the world. Her catfishing debacle was a reflection of her loneliness, a cry in the dark for connection outside of a relationship that no longer provided affection. Kody's iciness afterwards exposed not only the end of their marriage, but the end of empathy in their relationship. For viewers, Meri's story became a reminder of the importance of not settling for loneliness disguised as loyalty. For Christine, the lesson was about courage. After nearly 30 years of being sidelined and ignored, she chose freedom over suffering. Her decision to walk away resonated with countless fans who had watched her struggles for years. Christine's departure showed that it is never too late to reclaim happiness, even if it means breaking away from everything you've known. She proved that one does not have to stay trapped in a situation where love and respect are absent. In leaving, she became a symbol of empowerment, demonstrating that true strength sometimes lies in letting go. For Janelle, the lesson was about independence. She had always been the most practical of the wives, more concerned with work and her own stability than with competing for Kody's transitory attention. Ultimately, her unspoken choice to live apart from him made a strong statement. It indicated that things constructed solely on duty or habit could not last forever. Her tale reminded audiences that sometimes survival is about forging your own way, even if it means leaving the framework you helped create behind. And for the remaining wife, Robyn, who was left standing by Kody's side, the lesson was perhaps the most nuanced. Whether she meant to or not, she emerged as the face of favoritism in the family. She was the wife who got the lion's share of Kody's time, affection, and devotion. Though she defended herself again and again, maintaining she had never wished to be the favorite, her role in the family said otherwise. To some, she was a victim of circumstance, stuck in a position that she had not entirely selected. To others, she was the wedge that shattered the family. Regardless of what the truth might be, she stood for the deadly strength of imbalance. In a household where equality was the rule, she was the living embodiment of its failure. The children, too, bore lessons that rang out starkly through the pandemonium. Theirs was the chronic damage inflicted by neglect and partiality. They confessed to seeing their father very little, to feeling eclipsed by Robyn's children, to having spent their childhood looking for love that never came their way. Their words broke through the family story, revealing the price of Kody's decisions in a way that no grown-up could define. The kids' confessions reminded viewers that the real victims of dissolved marriages are frequently the ones who had no voice in the way those marriages were lived. Their heartache reinforced the value of presence, of reliability, and of unqualified love. For viewers, the Browns' chaos was more than television. It was a mirror to the universal realities of family and relationship. Audiences identified with the wives' struggles, with the pain of the children, and even with Kody's self-righteousness. They argued back and forth. Was this fall inevitable from the very beginning? Was it fate that a man who sought to split himself into four had no hope but to founder under the burden of doing so? Or was it the cameras, the spotlight, and the public glare that hastened the disintegration? Did having reality television around influence Kody's behavior, or did it merely bring to the forefront what was always simmering below the surface? Maybe the key is a little of both. The cameras magnified every fault, every favor, every moment of favoritism. But those faults existed long before cameras ever rolled. Fame did not make Kody's ego, it just amplified it. The spotlight did not create favoritism. It brought it out into the open for millions of viewers to witness what the wives and kids had known all along. Today the Browns are no longer united. The powerful family dynasty that was once has broken into pieces, with Kody and Robyn alone at the epicenter of what is left. The other wives have gone their separate ways, some having gained freedom, others having gained peace, but all learning to exist outside of the shadow of a man who had previously posed as their spiritual leader. The children still speak their truth, bearing with them both the wounds of the past and the potential for creating healthier lives than those they grew up in. And the audience is left with residual questions. Was this collapse always predetermined, encoded into the DNA of polygamy itself? Or was it the individual choices of one man, his ego, his favoritism, his neglect, that sealed the family's fate? Did wealth and fame taint what could otherwise have endured behind closed doors? Or was the Brown family meant to be a cautionary example all along, demonstrating to the world that no degree of faith can make up for the lack of fairness, love, and respect? Ultimately, Kody Brown's tale is not one of victory, but one of warning. It is a reminder that love cannot be coerced, that relationships cannot survive on imbalance, and that lack of attention leaves scars that are deeper than the imagination of anyone. His ambition to prove polygamy to the world became the tale of a man who wished to be a king but ruled over wastelands. His wives took comfort in abandoning him, his children took heart in telling the truth, and his audience took learnings from the anarchy. The empire itself is destroyed, but the tale remains. It remains as a reminder of the price of neglect, of the risk of ego, and of the fact that regardless of how mainstream or unorthodox a family is, there is still only one rule. Love, respect, and equality are the only pillars strong enough to weather life's storms. Without them, even the strongest castles will fall, and their kings will be alone left amidst the ruins.